Okay, 3 o'clock, we're going to kick off. So hello and welcome to the 3 o'clock session. We're looking at space initiatives and how you get that system change. We've got 3 amazing speakers today who are all living and breathing that. And then we've got a 4th speaker who is going to be telling us how it feels from the other side. It's going to be quite a fast-paced session, so we've got presentations at the beginning, and please put your questions in for the panel, and then we're going to do questions in the second half. So just so that you can see what we're looking at for questions. On the left-hand side of your screen, you will see that there is a speech bubble with a question mark in it. If you click on that, you'll be able to type questions in, and we'll be able to see those as the speakers to use later on in the session. So getting us started, we have Warren Lee, who is the strategic lead for the local delivery team at Sport England, and he's going to kick us off talking about some work in the local delivery pilots. Over to you, Warren.
Thanks, Lorna, and good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Lorna said, and it says on the slide is Warren Lee, strategic lead from the local delivery team at Sport England. I joined Sport England in April, so I've been taking local to extremes by only venturing as far as my kitchen table. That was until Friday when I could actually was out and about, and I actually visited Lola on the Hackney pilot. So just a tiny little bit about me. My background's in local government, was at the LGA for 10 years, and in the last 7 years I've worked with a couple of London local authorities. Given that I've been here 6 months, what I'm sharing is a mixture of the official learning and I guess some of my kind of early reflections. You might need to forgive me if I'm looking down at my notes, given my kind of lack of depth of knowledge of kind of some of this stuff that I'll be sharing with you today. For those that were in the session this morning, you may have seen my colleague Adam Rigglesford. So there's some similar content, but hopefully there's enough that's kind of different, and certainly the notes will be very different to what Adam would have covered. Next slide, please, Lorna. Oh, has that gone through? Ah, there we go. So I won't labour on this slide, but just for those that I recognise that not everyone will be familiar with the LDPs, so I'm just going to spend 30 seconds or so of a quick overview on those. As I'm going first, a quick introduction to what my perspective on systems change, and then focus on kind of the learning that we're seeing from the pilots, which is the topic of this slot. Next slide, please, Lorna. There's obviously a bit of a lag on the slides coming through. There we go. So even those of you with very good eyesight may not be able to see all of that, the kind of the infographic on the right hand side. But just in terms of why did they start, I think it's important. So the starting point was the current Sport England strategy, which is towards an active nation, which is due to come to a close in March 2021, starting in 2016 as we enter our new strategy cycle. And I think this recognised that some of the previous work that we've done around facilities or particular programmes, while they'd often had a really positive impact, actually we weren't always looking at everything else that was going on in that place. So these were about how are we actually going to deliver population behaviour change from a community and a local perspective, rather than kind of the impact on the individual. So as I say, articulated in 2016 in our strategy, selection process was in 2017, and the pilots kicked off in 2018. So we're about 2.5 to 3 years into this now. In terms of some of the logistics, there are 12, if you can count the red dots there, a mixture of rural, urban, coastal, different demographics, different sizes. Some cover an entire region, in terms of Greater Manchester being the largest, covering 2.7 million in terms of population, down to Withensea, which is a small area in the Humber region of a population of 6,000. And as we've got a London focus today, there are 2 in London. Obviously, Lola will speak about the Hackney pilot shortly, and there's another one in Southall, which is situated in the London Borough of Ealing. Thanks, Laura. Next slide. So again, really quickly, I just wanted to touch on kind of what is a system. As is traditional, get the kind of dictionary out and have a quick look at what that says. And now I won't kind of read it out, but I think the words that jump out to me are complex, I think everyone on all delegates in this virtual room today would agree that the kind of the system they work in is complex. I'm not sure if all delegates would agree that what they see is always a unified whole. And I guess that's what we're talking about in terms of systems change. How do we get that complex system into something that's unified, into something that has, as it said in the second paragraph, shared overall purpose and a shared goal? Next slide, please, Laura. So in terms of what a system looks like, I'm sure you'll have all seen various versions of this over the years in your own work and your own activity. I've put together 4 very different kind of formats of what it looks like here. But the reason I put these on is because I think there's a learning point here. A lot of our LDPs, I think all of them actually, one of the starting points was to map what their local system looks like. All took different formats and different kind of approaches to doing that. But actually the process of doing that in itself is very important. In terms of how you engage people, there's not really any value in this if it's one person sitting in a darkened room mapping their system. It's about how you engage people in it. What does the system look like to those people that are involved in it? What does it look to those people that are on the receiving end of it? And some of the benefits you can get from doing this systems mapping is you start to have those discussions around what's strong within the system. Where are the gaps? Where are the barriers? Who are the key influencers? And it just is a really good way of kind of starting to generate ideas. So I guess one of the kind of learnings is encourage everyone, if you don't have one already, is to think about what does your system look like, and how is that kind of currently represented, and do you have something that you can kind of go to that kind of gives a good description of it. Next slide, please, Lorna. And finally, kind of on this section really, so around what is systems changing, and just wary of time, I won't read that, but I think it's around, we talked about the unified whole earlier. So how do we intentionally look at that system to bring about lasting change? And the ways we do that can look at the policies, as it says there, routines, relationships, resources. So it's about understanding the system, but about recognising where it needs to change to achieve that kind of unified whole. Next slide, Lorna. And put very simply, that's about turning the arrows that you can see on the left, which represent a single partner, single intervention approach to increasing activity or whatever it is that system's trying to achieve, through to one where all the arrows are kind of pointing in the right direction, or as much as they possibly can be. And again, worth reflecting on whether your system is currently on the left-hand side or the right-hand side, or some combination of the two. So, kind of second half really of this, and is on the what are we learning so far? Some of the key ingredients. So next slide, Lorna. And I should kind of caveat this really with, we're obviously 2.5 to 3 years in. There is a national evaluation framework in place, and all 12 pilots have an evaluation partner. What I've quickly recognised is what that produces is an awful lot of really rich and really detailed learning, but it can be quite difficult sometimes to just pick out the kind of the helicopter conversation or the lift conversation in terms of the 2 or 3 things that we're learning. So I pretty much will only scratch the surface today, but I'll hopefully leave you with some opportunities to where you can find out more. So just on those particular points, the first one around leadership, and this is really consistent across all of them, that it's the quality of leadership that is fundamental, is proving fundamental to kind of the success of the pilots. It is people that make the difference in the local systems. It's people led, but it's people who are kind of willing to do something different and recognise that the status quo needs to change if we want to get that sustainable difference. Some of the kind of the key words that we're coming across in our learning is around those who are ready to share power, distributed leadership. It's about being open and honest, collaborative leadership, and a lot of empathy kind of running through that as well. There is a danger sometimes that when we look at leaders, we look at those influencers at the top of organisations, and what we're learning is it's right across the system. Yes, those people are important. They have some of the kind of the power and the levers at the moment, but it's also about recognising the role of everyone in that system. Kind of much maligned middle managers really key in terms of supporting this, in terms of pushing messages down and back up, and frontline practitioners as well, whether they're GPs, voluntary sector individuals, pharmacists, social workers. It's leadership right through that is really important. And just one quick example. So Southall LDP investing heavily in leadership in place. So they've identified 30 local organisers that are being supported and developed through a Harvard training model to actually embed leadership in place, strengthen the community leadership. And yeah, I may talk about that shortly again. Shared purpose, I kind of won't labour the point because it was on the previous slides as well. But again, in Southall, it's really important. So one of the initial pieces of work they did there in their baselining survey identified that with the national figure of people who are inactive at 25%, Ealing wasn't doing too bad at 27% of their residents inactive. But actually in Southall, that figure was up to 43% of people that were currently inactive. And that, alongside kind of known health inequalities around life expectancy, really kind of helped to be a bit of a catalyst and really kind of unlock that shared purpose, get people to buy in and recognise the need for change. In terms of community engagement, again, I mean, you'll have heard for many years about kind of reaching the unusual suspects and the difficulties that can be. But in this work, it is absolutely critical that you actually speak to people in the community and look at opportunities to do that. Again, I'll kind of go to Southall because that's the one I'm most familiar with, other than Hackney and Lola's on the call. And there was a big listening campaign in Southall where between January and March of this year, there was 250 in-depth conversations with people who are currently inactive to really extract that kind of local learning. And the final point there, potentially an obvious one around this, is about collaboration. If you're going to change a system, you don't do it by focusing on just kind of those involved in sport and physical activity. It's very much the kind of the wider collaboration. And to move outside of London, I just kind of briefly touch on Calderdale. So they have a framework called Policies, Working Practices and Delivery that they've developed. And just to have that works in practice, so just across health and social care, they've invested in posts in the hospital trust, in the mental health trust, so that physical activity is embedded into the policies and working practices of those organisations. It's embedded in the local drug and alcohol service, so that service users have an entry into pathways into physical activity. It's embedded into the long-term condition patient assessment process. The social prescribing link workers trained in moving medicine active conversations, and every single social worker receive training on how to have positive structured discussions that encourage physical activity. So it's about looking at the whole sector, kind of not just one element of it. Next slide, Lorna. I think I've got about a minute left, so I'll quickly wrap up in a second. It's not without challenges. This is a learning process. That's the whole point of being in a pilot. I won't talk to all of those, just to pick out a couple. The maintaining the strategic support when we know that there's always going to be other priorities. There are also challenges when key individuals move on. How do you make that sustainable and it not about one or two kind of key individuals and the impact that has? And how do you make sure that you are reaching all levels of the system and are not just kind of putting an individual subset of the system rather than seeing kind of the opportunities of the whole element? And the bottom points around how do you kind of constantly learn and capture what's happening and what lessons and knowledge you're taking from that, as well as getting on with the actual doing. So how do you keep that current when things are moving at pace? And I know we'll talk about kind of COVID and the impacts that's had on some of the work kind of later on in the session. So just in wrapping up and recognising that, next slide, sorry, Lana. I talked earlier about some of the opportunities to find out more and dig a bit deeper, and I'm sure we can share that as part of the resources. There are a number of communities of learning that have been taking place. These transition from in-person seminars and sessions view to some webinars and kind of online activities. There's been some recently around social prescribing and active environments. There's a leadership programme, as it says there, that we run jointly with the LGA for officers and members. There's one specifically on the impact of coronavirus, which I may touch on in the Q&A session potentially later, around local voices. And there are a whole host of additional resources with pen portraits of every single pilot, and a short to be released narrative that covers the kind of story of the LDPs. So next slide, Lorna, and I think this is me done. Is just to say, in terms of in summary, and probably no surprise to anyone at the outset, is there isn't a single solution. There's no magic bullet. It takes time. It's a long-term thing, and there's no single one policy solution that will address it at the local level. It's about understanding each local place, each local need, and looking at every single lever and an opportunity you have to increase physical activity. So I think that's probably my time done. So it just remains to say thank you for listening to that whistle stop rattle through. I look forward to any kind of questions and reflections in the Q&A later. So my final task is to hand over directly to Lola Akindoyan, who's the head of LDP at Hackney, and who I met physically on Friday for the first time. So Lola, over to you.
Thanks, Warren, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to take you through a little bit about our experience in Hackney as a local delivery pilot. I think I can move on to the next slide and then probably the next one after that pretty quickly. Thank you, Lorna. So if I just kind of tell you a little bit about our programme. So we are an LDP, and sorry, Lorna, if I could just go back one, please. And we are working in Hackney, but we're working in a specific ward in Hackney. So we're actually one of the smaller local delivery pilots. Our focus is improving health outcomes by reducing inactivity. So in a sense, that kind of shared purpose was set for us from the very beginning. And our model is very much asset-based. So working in the community to really understand the lived experience, not just in relation to physical activity, but actually just people's lives, because you kind of can't take one without looking at the other. So as I kind of go through the slides and tell you a little bit about our journey, I think the thing that I would really say at this point is that we are on a journey. So I can't sit here and say to you, this is systems change, this is exactly how we did it. And I think it's also really important to recognise, as sort of Warren's outlined, that a system is going to be different in everywhere, because, you know, place is such a significant part of what influences and shapes a local system. And it can be a very, very, you know, at a very, very micro level, or it can be at a kind of borough or broader kind of citywide level. Next slide, please, Lorna. So in Hackney, we are taking a whole systems approach. So I think that's the other thing just to flag, is that, you know, we can take particular parts of a system that we want to have a look, that we want to look at and want to focus in on. But for us, when we're looking at physical activity and the impact of inactivity on local people, we recognise that we needed to look at that very broadly. And so we are taking a whole systems approach. So for us, we've got 6 or 7 key themes, which are about how we communicate and share information, how we engage with communities, recognising that there are some people within our community that will need particular targeted support, but that also there are much bigger, chunkier issues, such as the environment that people live in, which was absolutely presenting both barriers and opportunities to how active people are able to be. And I think the one strand that I'd also really pick out here is the importance of the partnerships and the collaboration. So a system, as Warren said, doesn't exist in isolation. It's connected to so many different things. But also sometimes, even when there are connections, those connections work and operate in quite traditional ways. And so this is also about us needing to take a fresh look at things and to think about how well things are working and where there are potentially new opportunities for us to consider. Next slide, please, Lorna. So I think just as that tees up, I'm pretty sure the next couple of slides are, we can move past this one. This is just a good quote around systems change that I like from a Lang Kelly Chase report that I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen it before, because it goes into a lot of detail about kind of how to approach some of this work. It's a few years old, but it's still really good. So for us, I think there's a couple of things that I would just flag. That we have been, since at the beginning of our pilot, we've been very much in the kind of left-hand side, so planning for the systems change. So in the understanding the needs and assets, one of the things I wanted to sort of highlight is the importance of thinking about the shared purpose, but also who's influencing that or who's informing what that purpose is. So, to some extent, you can look at a local government structural system, but that isn't the system in its entirety. It's connected to a health sector, it's connected to the local community itself and to a range of other things. So it's important to get a rounded picture in order to really understand both the assets, but also understand that how the system, what the system is doing and what it can bring to the conversation. And that leads us to the other points about the multiple actors. And I'll show you our initial systems map, which we're just in the process of updating. But I think also I would just encourage everyone to have really a real kind of openness in terms of that thinking, because actually some of the people who will influence or are important to engage are almost the unusual suspects. And I don't mean that in relation to communities directly. I mean that in relation to things like regeneration teams or your street scene and public realm colleagues and all those people who may have opportunities and things to contribute to the discussion. So we're moving into the right-hand side of doing the system change and doing it together around thinking about what leadership looks like for us, and also a constant process of fostering and having that learning culture. There are things that actually I would do slightly differently if I'd known them now. I would kind of amend things slightly. But it is the process of constantly thinking, actually, how is this working and can we do this any better? Next slide, please. So I think some of the things just to say is that thing about kind of almost taking the time to really think about what it is that one is trying to achieve. And also you're going to have lots of people that make up a system, but they don't all need almost the same level of attention, and that people will come in and out of your system and interact with your system at different times, depending on the focus of your work at different times. And that's certainly been our experience. And so I just wanted to share a couple of tools that we've used in Hackney, which has been a stakeholder matrix, which has helped us to think about, the absolute places that we need to focus and, engage in conversations and build those relationships. And then also the map on the right-hand side, which I know you cannot read. I wouldn't expect you to be able to read it, but I just wanted to give you a sense of lots of different things that we have been looking at. And in fact, this was done in 2019. There were a significant number of, an increased number of kind of little circles, because the map has changed. And I think that's the other thing, is that it's not, this whole process is a process of kind of continuous development. Nothing is static. And I think it's important to also then go back and revisit the systems, maps, and some of these things as you go through your journey. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of things that I think I just wanted to highlight in relation to our experience in Hackney and our role as a local delivery pilot. And it has absolutely been about creating space and conditions to facilitate dialogue and to bring people together and to think about ways of working differently around the agenda of increasing physical activity. Systems change probably isn't the right thing for everything. I think that's one of the things that I would flag. I think sometimes there are things that shorter, sharper interventions or projects are better for. But when we are looking at those kind of entrenched, deep issues, that have been around for a long time, then taking a systems change approach definitely feels like the right thing for us and is likely to be the right thing for you. But it hasn't been easy. And, and I think across the local delivery pilots, a number of us would talk about, some of the challenges as well as the opportunities, but just the fact that we definitely, as a network of local delivery pilots, are encouraging each other. So I think the importance of just recognizing from the outset that if you're doing this work, it's for the long haul, really. So my first thing would be is it is complex, it is messy, it does change. And sometimes there are tensions and things actually conflict, and it's about being able to work through those. And there's a phrase, I first heard it with Sport England. I have a feeling it perhaps wasn't necessarily theirs, but the kind of say yes to the mess. And I think that's really true in terms of our experience. It won't happen overnight. So one of the things that I would definitely say is that we needed more immediate things for people to see. And we were in a conversation with colleagues this morning who were sort of wanting to see stuff happening. And actually a lot of the systems change stuff is almost invisible to people that are immediately in the community, but people want to see those kind of tangible, quick wins. So I think there's something about how that's achieved so that you give people a sense of pace and momentum while you are looking at some of those more complex, knottier things that may be happening behind the scenes. We've touched on the importance of relationships, but I also think find your allies, the people that you don't have to convince too much that this is a good thing to do, because they will help buoy you along and they will help make some things easier, and they'll also help encourage you when you're really dealing with the things that are quite difficult and those harder relationships and those people that it takes a long time to engage in and build trust and confidence in doing the work. There is an end outcome. So even though it gets messy, it's difficult, it feels like it's taken a long time, at this moment in time with COVID and with everything almost changing, I find that almost daily I'm having to remember why we're doing this work, and to believe that we will continue to achieve and work towards the outcomes that were set from the very beginning. You know, it's quite hard to keep going on a program of work that might be taking 5-6 years to get to the outcomes that you want to achieve. But I think stay focused on it, because you will get there. And then the last thing I really wanted to say is you have to believe in it. You know, I don't think you can do systems change if you think it's just a process or something you can go through, you know, involve a few people and, you know, it will suddenly change things for the better. You absolutely have to take that you have to take yourself into the work. And I'd say that that's something that across all of the local delivery pilots, there is an absolute sort of belief, passion and commitment that change is possible and that actually people will be engaging in more physical activity. So whistle stop tour, I hope, you know, that it's been useful in terms of our journey in Hackney, and no doubt there may be questions that I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Warren and Lola, for going through some of that stuff. Lola, you were particularly clear about how complex systems is and how hard it is to keep working through it and keep yourself motivated on the long haul. I hope that London Sport is definitely one of those allies that are sort of buoying you along as we carry on. Just want to remind everyone in the audience that you've got the ability to ask questions of our panel before I move on to the next section, and you can use the question mark speech bubble on your left hand side to put questions in. I'm going through to Sam for the second part of the presentations today. Some of you will have seen Sam yesterday when he was representing the Breaking Boundaries project. And if you didn't see that, you can watch it back on the on-demand section on the platform. It's a really good session. It's called Someone Like Me. But for today, he's representing the Model City project, and its entirety in Barking and Dagenham, but speaking about the 3 locations across London as well. And he's brought with him Gavin, who is part of the youth zone over in Barking and Dagenham, and they'll talk through that part of the project. So I will hand over to Sam.
Thanks, Lorna. Hopefully everyone can hear me, and welcome. Lorna, would you like to load up the first slide, please? Just while that's there we go. Just to give you an overview of myself, I guess I think of myself as a human being within the place-based global family of sport. So I've done everything from delivering in schools and education to going out as far as the United Arab Emirates to deliver football programs out there. I have my own organisation over in West London. I'm involved with a cohesion programme in Barking and Dagenham with Breaking Boundaries, and it somehow led me through my crazy career into Model City. And I'll give you a bit about that now. If you'd like to load up the next slide, please. Should be with us shortly. Yeah, so it's a collaborative program between Laureus, who I joined in January 2019, the Mayor of London, specifically we're one of the flagship programs within the Sport Unites strategy that you may or may not have heard of, which is about essentially doorstep sport and trying to make London one of the most active cities in the world, which is quite ironic at the moment, but it wasn't all, we weren't always in a COVID world, and Nike via their Made to Play strategy. So very much three partners who deeply believe in the power of sport as being able to deliver more than just getting people active. It's all the place-based elements that we're going to talk about shortly. So to give you a bit of an overview, yeah, Model City is all about having a sport for development and place-based focus. It very much focuses on one area, which we call something quite fancy that you may have heard of called hyperlocal. A third of a borough, approximately 100,000 people. And we're running, it's a pilot program, which has been running since 2018, and the pilot ends in March 2021. But we're very actively working to turn it into something a bit more long-term. It's using a bottom-up approach. So it empowers local people and organizations, anyone who could be affected or could drive and affect local change. We want them to be involved in this. Anyone who sees that they want to make some sort of change in their community. And it was mentioned in the previous presentations, sport isn't just the only thing. And we very much believe in that. It can be a glue that brings people together, but the third point about the critical mass of organizations, residents, other organizations, non-traditional faith groups, businesses, maybe from the corporate sector, or who would be liking to work with schools or colleges to recruit from other funders. They all can come together and be something so much more than just a group of people sitting around a table and backslapping each other. The place-based approach is about long-term systemic change, not about always, but occasionally quick wins. And our funders provide the structure for the local community. So ourselves, Laureus, and our two worthy partners. And they put in place myself, and I oversee Barking within Barking and Dagenham. We have Henry, who oversees Haringey East in the north of the city. And we have Zanetta, who oversees 3 parts of Hounslow, Bedfont, Feltham, and Hanworth. So I work 4 days a week. My 2 colleagues work 5 days a week. So it's very much an investiture within us being part of those communities. Next slide, please. Just while I'm waiting for that to come through, I'll tell you a little bit about some of the issues. Here we go. Very quickly. So austerity, fairly obvious that we've suffered as a nation with cutbacks, sport, education, the arts, all the areas that are so important to create systemic change have been cut. Model City is about trying to support organizations to develop beyond the ecosystem of relying purely on funding from a top-down approach, so chucking funding at people and having a very dysfunctional relationship maybe with funders. The lack of investment on capacity, so skills, actually the types of things that those people truly need to become sustainable organizations, and the fact that some of these individuals are not just working for that organization or volunteering for that organization. They may have a full-time job, they may be doing other things. So how can they be supported to truly make local change, but also impact on that state or road or park that they're working in, and for other people to know about it? Local initiatives competing against each other, I think that's fairly straightforward. We do still work in a silo operational sector. I don't think any sector is not like that. Model City is about trying to bring people together in a more open format and to try to develop trust over time, and to go into the next point about lack of awareness of local opportunities, to share opportunities and to share those parallel lives and interests and journeys to help each other, not to have to look further out of the place that you call home or where you are delivering to local stakeholders. There's also a lack of trust, going back to the airdropped initiatives and constant change. So short-term fixes coming in, we're giving all the whistles, all the bells, but actually what are we trying to achieve? And which we'll discuss later on, COVID-19, which obviously has caused some major issues towards how people deliver sport, but also just with organizational infrastructure and the constant change that we've seen with obviously governmental directives with what is happening with lockdowns and easing out of lockdowns and how that's affected sustainability models and just being able to deliver and engage with your participants. Next slide, please. So this is where we are, just in case you needed to know. Gavin and I do our work over in the east of the city. And the reason why we've got those fancy letters isn't because my keyboard decided to type for itself. It's because part of our the culture that we're creating, which I'm going to race through, I can get Gavin on the call, is it's about handing a lot of ownership and leadership over to the community. So I kind of stand in the background as the coordinator, but initially I'm doing coalition building. After the first year in 2019, and we developed a steering group of organizations who were interested in doing more than turning up to meetings. They actually wanted to make systemic change and share knowledge and journeys. They created their own leadership teams and they renamed the programs, which is part of the successorship and legacy. So Barking Model City, for example, Haringey Model City, Hounslow Model City are just working titles. In Barking, we're called Barking Sports for Change. In Haringey, Active Change Haringey. And down in the West, Generations Active, Bedfont, Hanworth and Feltham. And they represent the ideals that those groups are working towards, which I'm going to go through later. Next slide, please. So how did we come up with these areas? You know, what is it that actually works? Well, being a partner of the Mayor's Office, we were able to access, which most organisations can, but we were still able to use and sit down and look at things like MOPAC information, Mayor's Office Police and Crime information. And then we had our own little ingredients process, which is we needed to ensure that the following things that hopefully you can see, but I'll quickly discuss with you, were available. If I go to the left side, we needed facilities. This kind of program is not about investing in buildings, unfortunately. That would probably take a few more pounds than we have available. It was more about going down to the bottom end, which was about a critical mass of local delivery groups. They didn't have to be finished articles. A great example is the Future Youth Zone. It didn't exist when I came on board in January 2019. It was about ideas and potential and things that were maybe coming or being delivered at whatever level. And then linking in on the right-hand side to a spirit of collaboration. With the community structures, we're talking about groups that they may have governance or support needs. They may be quite far down the line. They may be, for example, again, with the Future Youth Zone, part of a national framework that we can use to support other groups to puppy walk in a collaborative sense, sharing knowledge, sharing journeys, and the strong committee. And I should add, if you go into challenges, that was a big challenge in the first year, getting people to turn up and come regularly and understand what it is. Most of the people I spoke to in the first year said to me, Sam, what do you want? You know, that was very clear. What do you want? And, you know, it was very clear when I said back to them, what do you want? That takes time. And what I had to do was turning up to sports sessions, turning up at unsociable hours, wearing sports gear, which I do anyway, but explaining to them about my journey, that I have other things going on outside of my job, and I get where you're at with funding issues and other things. Would you have time for a cup of coffee to talk about that? Could I see what you're doing and meet some of your volunteers? And you can't see it. You may be able to see it at the bottom. It says the need, which was identified by the community. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Next slide, please. So it doesn't seem to want to load up, but I'll explain to you. What you should be looking at is the drop versus the scaffold on the left-hand side of an image that, we've just gone past it. I don't know if we can go back to it, Lorna. May not be showing. Don't worry, we'll go to the roadmap. I can explain how that works. So all the work that we put in the first year in 2019 with the roadmap was to create, if you think of a sports coach, it was to create the philosophy and vision. There we go. And if you look on the top right, you might not be able to see it. That's our philosophy for Barking. In Barking, we took a year. I had to push back many times on our leadership team who would be saying, how are you getting on? Are we ready to move to the next phase? Can we unlock some funding and test out this model? No, they need more time. We still have people coming in. They still need Sam to come out and see them. Unfortunately, I haven't got a 3D printer and I can't print out more of myself. But that was important. It was important for us to have an open and very positive relationship with our senior partnership team to actually explain clearly what we were doing. And we work, just so that I'm not overly suggestive, with, if you look in the top left, our external evaluation team, with the National Diversity Team for Inclusion, who regularly were coming to our monthly steering groups to work on this. And how do we create this? Brainstorming, sticky note task building, having the meetings as a roadshow. We'd go to different venues every month to actually also allow those organizations, if they had a venue, to showcase themselves. Networking, just talking about how life is and going away from the sporting focus all the time. Sport is why we're there, and physical activity. But these people are human beings who actually do want to talk sometimes about the other things that are tiring them out. I've got kids to drop. I've got things to do. I can't turn up at 5 o'clock in the evening. So it was about us not only creating this roadmap vision in the first year, it was about building those relationships to show that we were a family of organizations rather than corporate partners who were there to take something from each other. And time was a big thing. It was a huge thing. And it led us to actually, if we had to go back and do this whole program again, we would have given more time. We did have time, but certainly more time to coalition build and just give organizations a bit of digestion time to just let me give Sam a call and tell me how that meeting really felt. Next slide, please. So I'm going to bring Gavin in a moment. Gavin came and the youth zone came over to us purely because, well, we'd heard for several months about this amazing youth centre that was coming. I made some initial conversations with Zach, who's one of your amazing managers. And we essentially then started talking about what actually the Future Youth Zone could do with us. I think the key thing that what we learned with Future Youth Zone before I bring Gavin in was, although they've managed to become a grantee, we released £130,000 into the community, up a maximum of £30,000 per organisation to test out the theory. Future Youth Zone have taken responsibility as seeing themselves, now they've become a grantee, to help others. I just wanted to make that clear because some people have said, if it's a place-based approach, how have you allowed funding for only certain groups? We've said, well, we need to test out how the model works. And part of that is encouraging grantees to match up some of their funding with other non-grantees and beyond. Gavin, over to you, but I will ask you some questions as we go.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. Hey, everyone. My name's Gavin, and I'm really lucky to be the Chief Executive of Future Youth Zone, which opened in Barking and Dagenham in May 2019. And other than, I know we're pushed for time, but other than the information that's on the slide in front of you, we currently have 7,500 young people who are members of Future Youth Zone in the borough. And prior to COVID-19, we were seeing around 1,500 to 1,600 visits by young people into our building every single week. So it was a busy, bustling, vibrant place for young people. And we're really proud to be a grantee of Model City.
Next slide, please. So Gavin, we've already I've beaten you to it just because we were short on time about how you got involved. What were your thoughts initially of Model City or our place-based approach that we were talking about?
So I think initially we were really attracted by the opportunity to collaborate with other organisations. We recognise as a new organisation coming into the borough that it's important that we learn and that we listen to other people who have existing organisations, existing provision going on. Definitely offered a front door to get to know people and who had like-minded objectives around working with young people. I think my first opinions, if I'm being perfectly honest, definitely curious, definitely one of intrigue, and lots of questions around how it would work, why it would work, where it's worked before.
Great. Next slide, please. Just while we're waiting for that to load, I can ask the question just to keep time flowing. So I've spoken a bit about some of the challenges that I saw. Gavin, what challenges have you seen us go through with your good self? But also generally, what challenges have you encountered? Because I know you're very big on the place-based approach as an organisation.
How long have you got? So there's been lots of challenges along the way. The first one is definitely change is going to be challenging for individuals. It's challenging for organisations. But one of the great things about the Model City approach is that we're working on change together. We define our common values, our common purpose, and we're all in that change together. So that's great about the coalition. I think other challenges are developing trust with organisations and between organisations. That's always going to be a challenge for any coalition, any group of organisations coming together. Keeping the messages that we have for the wider community, for our staff teams, for us as organisations, nice and simple and nice and clear, can sometimes be a challenge. And I think for us, we're a new organisation, and this was an opportunity to really try and get to grips with managing some restricted funding opportunities that being a grantee has allowed us to do. So lots of challenges to overcome, but one of the great things about working together is that you can do that as a group.
Thanks, Gavin. Lorna, could we just jump to after the challenge, just the next slide after that? Because I might bring Gavin into that just to finish off. about what we've learnt. Okay, thanks, Gavin. I think the main thing, certainly, that Gavin's touched on, which I'm just going to get, Gavin, I'll get you at the end just to give your views on any of the points that we've made. And if you look, to those watching, if you look clearly at the yellow highlights, they're really important. And they're not just things I'm saying because it makes us look good. Patience has been the key. And to reassure people, we are aiming to stay a while. Model City started off in the United States several years ago in a similar fashion as a pilot, with the intent and the transparency, which is really important. So every decision we make goes through the steering group. I can't make decisions without their say so. So in order for me to do that, I have to build trust. In order to build the trust, I have to be positive with how I'm actually developing with those organizations, time, energy going to programs. And even now during COVID, just being available to hear from them, how their well-being is as leaders, and encouraging them where possible to bring some of that learning into the group. It's important to do our research. So even with the Future Youth Zone, before I met Zach, I had a read up about what Onside Youth, obviously the parent organization that supports the youth programs, does, Youth Zones does, so that I could understand that and I can communicate that and almost work as an advocate, and we talked about allies earlier, when Future comes to me with ideas or another organization comes to me. I also, and we know as a group, we've had to learn about conflicts and being able to stay neutral, and that's been a challenge in itself. But having a portal where people can speak outside and encouraging feedback's the key. There doesn't always have to be a right versus wrong. What we can't expect to do is because we've been there for a couple of years, to change people's mindsets in that period, which may have lasted generations. That's not our job to do that. Our job is to create an environment where people feel safe to talk and to engage and to share. But we know it's not for everyone. Providing structure, so reflection. I think that's the biggest thing for me as the coordinator, but encouraging groups to do the same as well. Someone will come to me and say, "Oh, Sam, I really want to get some funding to do X, Y, and Z. How can I get them to see in a way that suits them and isn't disrespectful to them that maybe their governance needs a bit of work? So can I bring in maybe a pan-London support organization or work with the volunteer sector to help them with that as well? So it's not just coming from me, because we want successorship here. We don't want them to rely on me constantly. It will happen. It has happened. But now we're at a good stage where the steering group are kind of self-leading each other and doing a bit of that. But there's still work to do. Walk the talk. Sounds fancy. Just about trust, like I said earlier. And the last couple of points, transparency, as I said, trying to avoid tokenism. So many people came to us at the start and said, Nike, can we have some T-shirts and caps, please? And we had to be transparent and say, we'd rather use that money for actually doing what we want it to do, which is to help you save lives through your work or change your lives via the capacity support and skills packages that we've been trying to set up. And which leads funnily into the next one. Money is important, but actually we have found it's not essential to communities who have seen flash in the pan projects in the past. It's about the timing of when that money is injected in and about they understanding the power of the work they do. So then we don't conflict and go back to the original program issues, systemic issues they've had in the past, where they get money, but they become silo orientated and disappear. So it's a long-term process, as Lola was saying earlier, and belief. You have to believe in it. If you don't believe in it, it's not going to work. But we also have to accept it's not the right time for some people. So the door is wide open in our membership. People can come and go, but we try and encourage them to give us feedback if the program is not working for them. Just before I hand back to Lorna, Gavin, was there anything you'd like to add from your perspective as a huge stakeholder in the community?
No, I think you've nailed all the main points, Sam. I think trust is the biggest thing for me, and that will be the one thing that hopefully will be the longest lasting change. That trust between organisations in the area will be really important.
And that's us. Thank you, Lorna.
Thank you so much, guys. We're running a little bit late on the presentations, but we've got 10 minutes to do questions. And I wanted to start off with one I'd really like to direct to Lola, if that's possible, which is around the impact that COVID has had, whether that is positive or negative, on some of the plans you had around the system change that you were trying to get in place. Oh no, we've got no sound. Warren, can I get you to step in at that point and we'll see if we can get Lola's sound back? Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think the question's around, is it an opportunity or a risk? And I guess the obvious answer is it's both. We've just published through our LDPs, and I'll put it in the chat actually when I can work out how to do that, a report called Local Voices, which captures the experiences of the local delivery pilots across COVID, and that captures both. So I won't, it's a lengthy report. I won't try and cover the whole lot, but on the risk kind of side of things, obviously I think a lot of LDPs and all delegates, I'm sure, would recognise the widening inequalities, impact on well-being, impact on mental health that they've seen in their local areas. And we've seen that actually these other priorities around shielding, around medicine, around food, that may be more of a priority than physical activity initially, certainly. And then the financial sustainability of some of the providers and community organisations and their focus in the area. So plenty of risks. But on the opportunity side of things, there are definitely, I think we've all recognised the kind of the common purpose, those really hyper-local people coming together, supporting each other, community-based organisations. Is there opportunities to kind of to build on that? We've seen strengthen relationships in the system. So social care is absolutely recognising the importance of some of their clients remaining really inactive during the moment because of the lack of kind of ability to get outside and get out and about. And other opportunities, people have been forced to be local, so they're recognising the opportunities that are available in their local area, the pathways they've never discovered before because they've been at work and they've done their activity at the gym at work rather than using their local spaces. So I'll put it in the chat. There's a lot in there, but I think for me, it's lots of opportunities, but not forgetting there's lots of potential risks as well.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Sam or Gavin has got anything they'd like to add to that in terms of some of the challenges you've had with COVID and sort of system change and potentially some of the positives that have come out of it while Lola dials out and dials back in.
Gavin? I'm happy to talk about some of the positives that we've seen as an organisation in the community. So I think first and foremost, as I said, we're a new charity in the borough, and the last 6 months have enabled us to show the community, the residents, that we are a community asset, that we are there for them. We've enabled ourselves to pivot our offer and put our offer online, but also to support the community, food deliveries, medication deliveries, things like that. And then the second great opportunity that we've seen is we had great relationships with young people. We've now built some great relationships with their parents, with their families, with their carers as well. So 2 opportunities from the last 6 months.
And just to add in there, Lorna, Future Youth Zone also supported the steering group by sharing out their remote Zoom policy to help some of the, I was speaking earlier about governance. So that's another way that the by proxy support is not just one focused thing, it's multifaceted, which is really exciting for us.
Really important to see the sharing of assets like that. I sometimes think that you don't realise how much you can kind of connect those things. So really good that the youth owner are able to kind of put that forward. We've got a question that's coming for the whole panel, and hopefully Lola's back on the call, but I won't go straight to her. I'll give her a second, which sort of says, at this point in the journey, is there anything you would have done differently? Does anyone fancy kicking us off with that one? Slowly, start.
I'd share a reflection from Hackney, really, and it's one that is also something that we've shared. A number of colleagues have shared who are involved in kind of place-based working around systems change, and so we have a place-based network in Hackney, and we've got some, several projects that are kind of like 5 and 10 years. And I would say, and I remember somebody mentioning this to me, that they would reset year 0 at least once, if not twice. And that thing about the gentle intro and not necessarily making people aware that you are there, because I think you have to be able to manage expectations. And there's something about that kind of, people want to see delivery, but then also you need to set a foundation for systems change. So some of the stuff around sort of capacity building and how you do all of that before you actually almost start the elements of the work. So I'd say the setting the foundation is a big part of this work. And if anything, I think we would take more time. We've taken time to do it, but we've also done that at the same time as saying we're here, we're trying to do this work. And I think we'd probably do that on a quieter level.
It's really helpful. You've started answering a question that someone else put in here around practical tips for maintaining engagement in the systems approach. And I think that's definitely one of them, the point at which you bring someone in and on board. Sam, would you kind of agree with some of that stuff about at what point you announce that you're actually working in this space?
Yeah, I think it's important to also, I think much like what Lola said there, it's that reset button. So we're doing that because that's something that I felt is so necessary to remind not just the people we're working with now that we can hold them to account to almost do our comm strategy, not for us, but with us. But also it allows the people to not feel, oh God, I'm 2 years behind now. You know, people who are joining the process or becoming part of this, and they've maybe either been reticent or they're brand new. They've decided to start something up, or they've accessed a job, an organization has accessed a new role that needs to be community developed. So I think some of it is us. If I had to go back and change anything, but linking into the second question, it would certainly be doing a little bit more of that. So yeah, Lola's not the only one thinking that. It's definitely happening in our 3 parts as well, but we're trying it. And I think the final thing that I'd probably say is don't be afraid to experiment with the model. I would have probably gone more to allies, but I actually didn't do that in some ways, which might have been good, to say, look, is this working? Actually, sometimes there's no harm in trying something. Our biggest change in Barking using that was I just ran a rugby session and invited all of the project leads there. And that changed the program overnight because I just couldn't get them to commit. When they realized they're all pretty much the same, as bad at rugby as me, it was a good thing. And it just changed things, and people could see they're trying to do something else. They don't want to necessarily sit there and get you in a room. They want to make you active too.
That perception change is a really important one, Warren. I think there's been quite a lot of that coming out from all the local delivery pilots in terms of just trying something a little bit different really can change that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of kind of my reflection, it's a bit difficult only being 6 months in terms of what to do differently. I think there is something for me, what I've felt is some of the language we use around systems change can be a bit impenetrable. We're trying to design a process that brings people in, but some of the language we use is a bit sport English or systems based, and I think we can do better at that. And I think capturing kind of stories that make this stuff real, because not everyone, talking about system change and maybe the way we've done today and throughout, it's not for everybody. It's certainly not for some of my friends and family, but actually if you tell them a story like Sam has just done about his colleagues playing rugby or about the impact it's had on an individual, I think that can help to engage people. And some of the assets I talked about at the back end of mine, I think we'll hope to address that gap from some of the learning that's emerging.
I think that sort of depth of flexibility as to how you approach things is going to be really important for that engagement things. I think, Gavin, you've probably, within young people, had to do some really different mechanisms for engagement and different approaches to get different young people to be able to kind of express themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Had to work in different ways that we've never worked before over the last few months, and going online and taking the offer there, but also taking our offer out into the wider borough and seeking out young people where they are has been really important for us, especially considering Youth Zone is a place where young people come to. It's not general, it wasn't a place where we went out from, so it's definitely changed the way we work.
No, we've lost your sound for some reason. Don't know what happened there. Okay, I'm going to finish off the session now because we've only got a couple of minutes left, and Lola and I both have to go to the panel session, which is next, which is reflecting on some of the stuff that's come through from today. I want to thank the speakers, such a diverse set of thoughts, and lots of learning and recommendations for everyone in the audience to take away with them. We obviously haven't been able to answer all of the questions, but we'll take a look at them. We'll make sure that we can share any additional information, and appreciate the links that have been shared with us. Thank you, Warren, and we'll make sure that that gets out to everyone. You'll be able to catch this again, as you can with all our sessions, in the on-demand section. And finally, for our audience, if you get the chance, please could you complete our feedback survey, which should be appearing in your chat, as we could really do with hearing your thoughts on how this session went, and that'll help us plan for things in the future. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, speakers.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks all. Bye.